All right, so welcome to another deep dive, you guys. Today, we're going to be going through a series of articles from the Dealey Plaza Echo,
Oh,
which is a British journal that is dedicated to investigating the JFK assassination.
okay.
But we're not going to rehash the entire assassination.
Right.
We're going to be focusing in on one particularly fascinating individual,
Okay.
a Dallas gunsmith by the name of John Thomas Masen.
Interesting.
So the question is, what makes this guy Mason so intriguing?
Yeah, I'm curious.
For one thing, he bears a striking resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Really?
So is this just a coincidence?
Hmm.
Or is there something more to it?
Right.
The sources we have suggest that Mason might have been involved in arms dealing, had connections to Cuban exiles, and might even have played a role in the events surrounding the assassination.
Wow. It's certainly a story that raises a lot of questions.
Absolutely. So let's start with that uncanny resemblance between Mason and Oswald. When Oswald was arrested, ATF agent Frank Ellsworth, who had previously dealt with Mason, was momentarily convinced that Mason had somehow escaped custody to carry out the assassination.
Wow.
So you can imagine like the chaos of the moment, the confusion, and then just adding on top of that this near identical suspect potentially on the loose.
Right.
And it wasn't just Ellsworth.
Oh.
There are accounts that suggest that another inmate, John Elrod, also mistook Mason for Oswald in the Dallas jail.
Oh, wow.
And these articles even include photographs of Mason and Oswald from around 1958, 1959.
Okay.
And the resemblance is truly remarkable. It's
Yeah.
almost like you're looking at the same person.
Wow. That makes you wonder
Yeah,
if this resemblance was purely coincidental
right.
or if it could have been intentionally exploited as part of a larger plan,
Right.
perhaps to create confusion or even to set Oswald up as a patsy.
Yeah, let's delve into Mason's background and see if we can uncover any further clues.
Okay.
Mason's life was, to say the least, rather unconventional. He grew up in Dallas and attended Woodrow Wilson High School,
Okay.
which is the same high school as Malcolm Wallace, a figure many believe was involved in the assassination.
Oh, wow.
And Mason even received a sharpshooter award in high school.
That's an interesting detail to be sure, especially considering his later activities.
Right.
Yeah.
But his college career is where things start to get really perplexing.
Okay.
He bounced around to multiple Texas universities, even spending time at Monterey University in Mexico, often for very short periods, with no record of him actually graduating.
So he's constantly on the move,
Yeah.
perhaps using his education as a cover for something else.
Right.
Some researchers have speculated that these educational stints could have been fronts for smuggling operations or even intelligence work.
And in 1963, adding another layer of intrigue to all of this, Mason traveled to Mexico City
Oh, wow.
to visit the Mendoza brothers, known for their expertise in firearms manufacturing.
Okay.
And what's interesting about this is that the FBI downplayed this trip, claiming that Mason was in Guadalajara, which is hundreds of miles away. So the Mendozas themselves are a fascinating part of this story.
Okay.
The patriarch, Rafael Mendoza, had a long history in the world of firearms, having even worked as a gun designer for Pancho Villa.
Wow.
His family later established a successful firearms manufacturing business.
Okay.
So the question becomes, what was the true nature of Mason's relationship with the Mendozas?
Right.
Was it a simple social visit?
Right.
Or something more clandestine, perhaps related to acquiring weapons?
That's a good question.
And this was all happening just months before the assassination,
Oh, wow.
which makes it even more suspicious.
Yeah.
But hold on to your hats because we're just getting started.
Okay.
Mason was also deeply involved with Cuban exiles
Okay.
who were actively seeking weapons and explosives. Specifically, he had connections to groups like Alpha 66,
Okay.
led by Manuel Rodriguez or Carberio,
Yeah.
and the DRE.
And who are these groups exactly?
So Alpha 66 was an anti-Castro paramilitary group known for conducting raids against Cuba.
Oh. Well,
And the DRE, or Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil,
okay.
was another anti-Castro organization with a more clandestine approach.
Okay.
This group had ties to the CIA's JM Wavy station,
And what's that?
which was a covert anti-Castro operation.
Oh, wow.
So Mason's involvement with these groups raises a crucial question.
Like that.
Was he working with them?
Right.
Or was he using them for his own purposes?
It seems like he might have been playing both sides.
Yeah, according to our sources, ATF agent Frank Ellsworth, we mentioned earlier, was running an undercover operation, posing as a potential buyer
Right.
to investigate Mason's activities.
So,
So Mason, unaware of Ellsworth's true identity, approached an Army ordnance captain
okay.
named George Nante at Fort Hood,
Okay.
seeking assistance in acquiring the weapons he thought Ellsworth wanted.
So essentially, Mason was walking right into a surveillance operation without even realizing it.
Exactly. And there's more. Our sources reveal that Mason had knowledge of a planned Cuban operation,
Okay.
scheduled for late November 1963,
Hmm.
involving commando raids and an amphibious assault on Cuba.
So just weeks after the assassination.
Yeah.
So this raises the question,
Yeah.
was this a legitimate operation?
Right?
Or was it meant to be a distraction from something else?
Right.
And what was the extent of Mason's involvement?
And Captain Nante didn't exactly have a glowing opinion of Mason.
Oh.
He described him as an opportunist,
Okay.
willing to do just about anything for profit.
Hmm.
Adding another twist to this tale, Mason even attempted to acquire weapons from a group of thieves who had just robbed the Terrell National Guard armory.
Oh, wow. This attempted deal with the armory thieves has some very intriguing implications.
It sure does. The deal ultimately fell through when the thieves were arrested.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. One of those arrested was Donald Witter,
Okay.
the mechanic for none other than Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Suddenly, we have a direct link between Mason and the man who silenced Oswald,
Right.
forever preventing him from telling his side of the story.
Exactly.
It seems like these seemingly separate threads are starting to weave a very intricate tapestry.
It's like we're uncovering a complex web of connections, and we've only just begun to explore its depth.
Right.
And remember, we're still in the thick of the events leading up to the assassination. Welcome back to our deep dive into the enigmatic life of John Thomas Masen. It's incredible how many layers there are to this story, and how each new detail seems to raise even more questions.
It's a testament to the complexity of history and the importance of constantly re-examining what we think we know.
Absolutely. We left off discussing Mason's potential connection to Jack Ruby through his mechanic, Donald Witter, who was involved in the attempted arms deal with the thieves who robbed the Terrell National Guard armory.
That connection certainly adds another dimension to Mason's story. It's a reminder that the JFK assassination wasn't just a political event. It was also a crime story with ties to the underworld and organized crime.
It's like a real-life film noir, full of shady characters and double crosses.
Exactly. And Mason's involvement with Cuban exiles, his attempts to acquire weapons, and his connection to Ruby place him right in the heart of this shadowy world.
But let's circle back to that uncanny resemblance between Mason and Oswald. We were discussing the possibility that it could have been deliberately exploited.
Yes, and one of those intriguing aspects of that is the possibility that Mason was the Mexico City imposter.
You're talking about the man claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald who visited the Cuban and Soviet consulates in Mexico City just weeks before the assassination.
Precisely. There were numerous discrepancies in their descriptions of this Oswald, including conflicting accounts of his hair color, height, and even his language skills. Some witnesses said he spoke fluent Spanish, which Oswald didn't, but Mason did.
And then there's the curious incident with the CIA's surveillance cameras, which were conveniently malfunctioning during these visits. Plus, they initially claimed to have destroyed an audio recording of the imposter speaking to the Soviets, but it later turned out that both the FBI and members of the Warren Commission had copies.
If Mason was indeed impersonating Oswald in Mexico City, it raises significant questions. Who orchestrated this charade and why? Was it to create a false trail leading to Oswald, to make him look like a communist sympathizer, setting him up as the perfect fall guy?
That's a classic intelligence operation tactic, creating a narrative that points to a predetermined conclusion.
Exactly. And it further complicates our understanding of Mason's role in this whole affair. Was he a willing participant in this scheme? Was he manipulated? Or was he operating with a completely different agenda?
So many questions, so few answers. But taking a step back, why should all of this matter to us? What is the significance of John Thomas Mason's story? Why should we care?
Because it challenges the official narrative of the JFK assassination. Mason's story, with its web of connections and unanswered questions, casts doubt on the idea that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. It suggests the possibility of a much wider conspiracy, one that potentially involved intelligence agencies, Cuban exiles, and perhaps even figures within the U.S. government itself.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. And these Dealey Plaza Echo researchers are meticulously piecing it all together, like detectives uncovering clues that others have overlooked.
They are indeed. And their work underscores the importance of independent research, of questioning established narratives, and of remaining open to alternative explanations.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If Mason was involved in this alleged plot, what was his role? Was he simply a pawn, or did he play a more significant part?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that only Mason himself can definitively answer. And that's what makes his story so tantalizing he's still alive. He could hold the key to unlocking one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century.
Can you imagine the secrets this man must be keeping?
It's almost too much to comprehend. He could confirm or deny his presence in Mexico City, clarify his relationship with the Mendozas, shed light on his dealings with Cuban exiles. He could potentially blow this whole case wide open.
It's like he's a living, breathing time capsule, just waiting to be opened. The Dealey Plaza Echo articles don't reveal much about Mason's life after the assassination. What happened to him? Did he simply disappear into obscurity, or did he continue to operate in the shadows?
That's a question we may have to explore in a future deep dive. But it reminds us that history is rarely neat and tidy. There are always loose ends, unanswered questions, and individuals whose stories remain untold.
And sometimes those untold stories contain the most explosive secrets of all. Speaking of secrets, let's get back to Mason's activities in the days leading up to the assassination. We know that he was arrested on November 20th, 1963, for possession of explosives. But this was just one of 3 arrests that week. He was arrested again on November 22nd, the very day Kennedy was assassinated, for investigation purposes.
That timing is incredibly suspicious, especially considering that Mason's mugshots from those arrests have never been released.
It's like someone wanted to erase his presence from the official record. And as we mentioned earlier, the Warren Commission was aware of Mason and even discovered that he was one of only 2 suppliers of the 6.5mm Mannlicher Carcano ammunition in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
The same type of ammunition that was used to kill President Kennedy. Yet for some reason, they never bothered to obtain his sales records to see if he had sold any to Oswald.
It seems like a rather significant oversight, wouldn't you say? Almost as if they were intentionally avoiding a line of inquiry that might have led to uncomfortable truths.
It certainly raises questions about the thoroughness and objectivity of their investigation, and it reinforces the need to constantly challenge official narratives and to seek out alternative perspectives.
So where does this leave us? What's the takeaway from all of this? What have we learned about John Thomas Masen and his potential connection to the JFK assassination?
I think the story of John Thomas Masen serves as a powerful illustration of how history is never as straightforward as it might initially appear. There are always multiple perspectives, hidden agendas, and individuals who may have played a much larger role than we initially realize. Mason's story highlights the importance of digging deeper, questioning assumptions, and considering alternative explanations.
It's a reminder that we should never take anything at face value, especially when it comes to events as momentous and as shrouded in mystery as the JFK assassination.
Exactly. And in the case of John Thomas Masen, the truth may be more shocking than we can even imagine. There are still so many unanswered questions surrounding his life and his potential involvement in this historical tragedy. What was the true nature of his relationship with the Mendozas? What role did he play in the world of Cuban exiles and arms dealing? Was he a willing participant in a larger conspiracy, or was he simply a pawn caught in a web of intrigue?
And perhaps the most pressing question of all, what does John Thomas Masen himself know about the events leading up to the assassination of President Kennedy? The answers to these questions could potentially rewrite history as we know it.
It's a reminder that history is not just something that happened in the past. It's a living, breathing narrative that continues to unfold as new information comes to light. And in the case of John Thomas Masen, the story is far from over.
All right, so welcome back to the show. We're going to continue diving into the life and potential involvement of John Thomas Masen in the JFK assassination.
Yeah, it seems like every time we uncover something new, more questions just keep popping up.
It's really amazing, actually.
It is.
We left off talking about Mason's arrest on November 20th, 1963 for possession of explosives.
Right.
Just days before the assassination.
Yeah, it's crazy how close it was.
But as we mentioned, this was just one of 3 arrests that week.
Right.
He was actually arrested again on November 22nd, the day of the assassination.
That's crazy.
For what was described as investigation purposes.
So this timing, combined with the fact that Mason's mugshots from these arrests have never been released, certainly raises suspicions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like someone was trying to make him disappear.
Right, like trying to erase him from history.
Right.
And we have to remember, he was one of only 2 known suppliers of the 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano ammunition in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Right. The same type used to kill Kennedy.
Exactly.
And the Warren Commission knew about him, but never got his sales records.
It's pretty wild, right?
It really is.
Like, why wouldn't they want to know if he had sold ammo to Oswald?
Yeah, it's a huge oversight.
It seems like a pretty big deal to me.
Definitely.
And then there's the whole connection to Jack Ruby.
Right through his mechanic.
Exactly, Donald Mitter.
Right.
Who was involved in that whole attempted arms deal.
Yeah, with the thieves.
Exactly, the ones who robbed the armory.
It's just so many connections.
So many.
So many things going on.
It really makes you think.
Yeah, it really does.
So where do we go from here?
That's the question, isn't it? What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think for me, the biggest thing is how complex all of this is.
Right.
It's not just a simple story.
Well,
There are so many players.
exactly.
So many hidden agendas.
Mason's story really shows how we can't just take things at face value.
You got that right.
We have to dig deeper,
Absolutely.
question everything.
Especially with something like the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
With so much mystery surrounding it.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history is not just about what's in the textbooks.
Right, it's about the untold stories, too.
Exactly, and the people like John Thomas Masen who might have played a bigger role than we realize.
Right, his story's like a puzzle.
Yeah, with so many missing pieces.
We may never find them all.
Like, at least we're trying to put it together, right?
That's what matters.
So for all of you listening at home, I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to keep exploring this historical event.
Yeah, keep digging, keep researching.
And never stop searching for the truth.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.